Do you believe that your empathy is a sign of your intelligence, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic vulnerability error where you are allowing a sub-story or a charming introduction to bypass your 2026 critical logic gates, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who audits the motive? What is the most logically terrifying part of the interaction command? Is it the sound of the pony disappearing, or the realization that Beryl Stapleton's mistaken identity reveals a much larger 2026 conspiracy than you were prepared to manage? If you found yourself predicting the exact betrayal of a strategic partnership by the specific over-friendliness ratios of the junior partners, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of professional infiltration with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a relationship audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of skepticism? If the interaction is the constant and the persona is the variable, why are you still solving for the comfort of the social bond instead of the absolute lethality of the terrain? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 haven is actually a hunting ground for a monster that doesn't follow the rules of the city? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though appearance is reality when function is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way Stapleton explains his botanical passion reveals a fundamental misdirection error in the way you have been vetting your current 2026 industry experts, do you see a harmless scientist or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the interaction? If you found yourself predicting the exact leak of a corporate secret by the specific familial loyalty ratios of your janitorial staff, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of insider collaboration with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a human resources audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of perimeter control? If the observation is the constant and the signal is the variable, why are you still solving for the identity of the convict instead of the absolute position of the mastermind? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that you are being studied like a 2026 specimen by a man standing in the shadows of the prehistoric huts? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though mystery is a form of magic when unobserved data is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way Barrymore defends his brother-in-law reveals a fundamental empathy exploit in the way you have been managing your current 2026 labor force, do you see a loyal servant or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the observation? What if the strategic advantage S of a hidden observer is a function of their anonymity A and the frequency of their data collection F? At what precise point of your 2026 operation does your discovery of a secret competitor transition from a tactical win into a catastrophic recognition error that effectively blinds you to the fact that they were actually your primary ally all along? Can you calculate the exact increase in your operational efficiency if you stop modeling your mission as a solo climb and start modeling it as a high-utility multi-tier integration where the person in the stone hut is the one holding the master key? If you were tracking a 2026 threat across a wasteland and felt the sudden, cold command to enter a hostile territory because you calculated that the hidden presence there was the only variable that could solve the case, would you have the logical ruthlessness to confront the unknown to secure the lead? How does it feel to realize that a discarded suit of clothes is often just a high-level form of a decoy signal where Predator's 2026 sensors are currently being exploited to target the wrong entity, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who understands the scent profile is the one who eventually predicts the kill? If a recognition command is to an obsession as a stone hut is to a Widemore, at what precise point of the encounter does the stranger become the partner? Do you believe that your independence is a sign of your strength, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic isolation error where you are failing to realize that your 2026 logic is being supplemented by a higher-order processor working in the shadows, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who finds the lair? What is the most logically terrifying part of the recognition command? Is it the sound of the death scream on the stones, or the realization that the hound is currently optimized to kill anyone wearing the Baskerville scent signature? If you found yourself predicting the exact death of a rival CEO by the specific decoy data ratios of their public-facing security, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of sensory overload with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a failure audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of discernment? If the recognition is the constant and the identity is the variable, why are you still solving for the appearance of the man instead of the absolute utility of his position? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 safety was only a result of a shadow bodyguard you didn't know existed? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though surprise is a weakness when revealed truth is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way the hound tracks the scent of the old black boot reveals a fundamental signature error in the way you have been masking your current 2026 high-value assets, do you see a dead convict or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the recognition? If the identification certainty C of a hidden threat is a function of the biological consistency B between a known ancestor and a current suspect, at what precise point of your 2026 pattern recognition does your focus on current behavior transition from a useful metric into a catastrophic identification error that effectively allows a 1000% predator to operate within your inner circle because you were too busy looking at his butterfly net instead of his jawline? Can you calculate the exact increase in your strategic leverage if you stop modeling your rivals as new players and start modeling them as legacy reboots, where the historical motive is the only variable that explains the 2026 aggression? If you were setting a terminal trap for a high-value target and felt the sudden, cold command to use your most prized asset as bait because you calculated that the organic lure was the only way to trigger the predator's final attack protocol, would you have the logical ruthlessness to risk the asset to secure the system-wide kill? How does it feel to realize that a family portrait is often just a high-level form of biometric storage where the past is currently revealing the identity of your 2026 executioner, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who sees the likeness is the one who eventually wins the war? If an identification command is to an obsession as a canvas oil is to a living face, at what precise point of the comparison does the theory become a fact? Do you believe that your strategic disguise is a sign of your dominance, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic deception error where you are assuming your 2026 enemy isn't running his own counter-surveillance scripts, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who sets the bait? What is the most logically terrifying part of the identification command? Is it the sight of the fog rolling over the moor, or the realization that the hound is about to be released on a man you've sworn to protect? If you found yourself predicting the exact betrayal of a family office by the specific phenotype ratios of its external claimants, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of hereditary ambition with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a genealogical audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own genetic inevitability? If the identification is the constant and the fog is the variable, why are you still solving for the safety of the perimeter instead of the absolute precision of the shot? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 ally is actually a cold-blooded Baskerville waiting for his turn to kill? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though chance is a factor when predatory instinct is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the hound? If the specific way Stapleton conceals his wife's identity as his sister reveals a fundamental relational exploit in the way you have been vetting your current 2026 executive teams, do you see a sibling bond or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the identification? What if the kill probability K of a defensive strike is a function of the weapon's muzzle velocity V and the clarity of the visual interface C through an environmental filter? At what precise point of your 2026 crisis management does your hesitation transition from a calculated caution into a catastrophic termination error that effectively allows a 1000% threat to reach its target because you were too busy being terrified by the aesthetics of the problem instead of analyzing its biological mechanics? Can you calculate the exact increase in your operational security if you stop modeling your obstacles as monstrous forces and start modeling them as high-utility physical targets where the application of sufficient force is the only variable that matters? If you were watching a fog bank swallow your only line of sight and felt the sudden, cold command to fire into the white void because you calculated that the sound profile of the threat was a more reliable data point than your eyes, would you have the logical ruthlessness to trust your ears to secure the kill? How does it feel to realize that a hellish glow is often just a high-level form of psychological chaff where a competitor is using 2026 theatricality to bypass your rational defenses, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who sees the phosphorus paste is the one who eventually ends the legend? If a termination command is to an obsession as a lead bullet is to a glowing hound, at what precise point of the impact does the myth become a carcass? Do you believe that your fear of the unknown is a sign of your humanity, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic signal loss error where you are allowing your amygdala to overwrite your 2026 logic circuits, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who pulls the trigger? What is the most logically terrifying part of the termination command? Is it the sight of the hound's fire-breathing jaws, or the realization that Stapleton was so close to the perfect crime that only a 2026 grade master detective could have unlinked the chain? If you found yourself predicting the exact drowning of a rival entity by the specific arrogance to terrain ratios of their high-speed escape, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of overconfident navigation with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a terminal audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of a safety margin? If the termination is the constant and the fog is the variable, why are you still solving for the comfort of the clear day instead of the absolute precision of the blind shot? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 nightmare was just a dog with some chemicals on its fur? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though evil is a mystical power when malicious intent is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way Stapleton vanishes into the mire reveals a fundamental exit strategy error in the way you have been planning your current 2026 high-risk ventures, do you see a sinking man or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the termination? If you could lose yourself in a single hour of make-believe, would you ever want to find your way back to reality? Have you ever felt a connection so electric and sudden that it felt less like a meeting and more like a collision of two souls in the dark? What would it take for you to profess your deepest love to a complete stranger, knowing the sun would rise and steal the secret away? Is it possible to fall in love with the idea of someone before you even know the color of their eyes or the sound of their real name?